Välkommen! Du lyssnar på Lottapodden avsnitt nummer 178. I Ukraina så kämpar befolkningen för sitt lands överlevnad. För rätten att själva välja hur deras land styrs och vilka andra länder de samarbetar med. I kriget i Ukraina, precis som andra krig och konflikter, drabbas kvinnor och flickor av sexuellt våld. Det är våldtäkter, men också andra typer av sexuellt våld som påtvingade äktenskap, prostitution, sexuellt slaveri och trafficking. Och det drabbar då självklart kvinnor på plats i de krigsdrabbade områdena, men även kvinnor som är på flykt, till exempel när de befinner sig i gränsområden. Svenska Lottakåren har genom kampanjen Ögat hjälp oss att se sedan 2003 verkat för att synliggöra och sätta stopp för systematiska våldtäkter som vapen i krig och konflikter. Och just nu och till slutet av 2024 så samlar vi in medel till stöd för kvinnor som drabbats av kriget i Ukraina. Och mottagare av insamlingen, det är organisationen Women's Perspective. I det här avsnittet så får du hänga med på ett samtal om hur livet är för kvinnorna i Ukraina efter år av krig. Jag som pratar heter Mariia Öst och tillsammans med mig så möter du Mariia Kozubska. Hon lämnade själv Ukraina efter annekteringen av Krim och koordinerar organisationen Kvinna till kvinnas arbete i Ukraina. Kvinna till kvinna har funnits på plats i Ukraina sedan många år och jobbar bland annat med just Women's Perspective. Och medlen som Svenska Lottakåren samlar in kommer att förmedlas till Women's Perspective via Kvinna till kvinna. Lottapodden den är producerad av Svenska Lottakåren och vi är en frivillig försvarsorganisation som engagerar och utbildar kvinnor som vill göra skillnad i vardag, kris och krig för att stärka samhällets beredskap och totalförsvaret. Häng med in i samtalet med Mariia som sker på engelska för att lära dig mer om situationen för kvinnor i Ukraina men även för de som valt att lämna landet. Och så får du tips på hur du kan hjälpa till. Mariia, welcome to Lottapodden.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting.
So happy to have you here, and we're going to talk about the lengthy war going on in the Ukraine, connected to the work that Lottakåren is doing right now with fundraising for the organization Women's Perspective. And just so the listeners know who you are, tell me a little bit about who you are.
So my name is Mariia Kozubska. I work as a program coordinator for Ukraine program in Kvinna. I'm originally from Ukraine, have moved to Sweden for about 7 years ago, and have been working with civil society organizations both in Ukraine and here in Sweden.
So working with women's societies, as you mentioned, you're doing that both there and here. Why was that the direction that your life took?
I grew up in a small city for Ukraine. Like when we talk about small city in Sweden and Ukraine, it's a bit different sizes. And at that time, in the beginning of 2000, it was a hard time, like Soviet Union collapsed and independent Ukraine grew, and it was really hard economical time for population. And civil society wasn't something on the top of like people's mind. So it was something new. And I joined an international organization, a student organization, and I think it influenced how I want to influence the world. And I thought that being part of civil society and making changes, this is something that lights my heart. And from there, like I think it's been 15 years that I'm doing that work.
It's nice to be working with something that you're passionate about, isn't it?
It is. And also to see the change, the work that you're doing, bringing the positive change into the society, and maybe not, you can't see it from the immediate thing, but then in a long-term perspective, you also see that change.
So we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine that's going on, and as you pointed out before we started this session, we have to talk about it from 2014 because that's where it started. Even though I think that we often limit ourselves to the 2022 renewed invasion. So, but yeah, let's keep that in perspective that it actually started 2014. So what would you, just to give us an overview, what is the situation for women in the Ukraine?
The situation for women in Ukraine is hard. Even before the war, it was hard because, first of all, the division of the work that women does in Ukraine is not the same as the men do. So the women tend to work the same amount of hours as men, but also all the household work is on them, including like caring for elder people and caring for children. And after the full-scale invasion, it became even harder because a lot of men, either they volunteered to go to the front line or they were later mobilized. It means that women stayed alone and they took an extra role of taking care of their family. And also, in addition to that, a lot of women became either internally displaced people or refugees in European countries. So no matter where you moved, it requires extra resources, to get into the new society, new norms, new language, of course. And even if you're internally displaced people, you probably heard about the West and East Ukraine, the split of the languages, the different cultures in some ways. So the women who moved from East Ukraine to the West Ukraine also face that kind of challenges. Even if it's one country, it's a huge country.
Yeah.
And also we have this background from different empires, like Russian Empire and then Austro-Hungarian Empire on the West.
So what you're saying is, when it comes to equality, there's a more of a traditional view on what women do and what men do. And something that really surprised me that I learned just a short while ago is that there actually are quite a lot of women that serve in the armed forces, that it's regarded as the most equal defense force when it comes to men and women serving.
Yes, there are a lot of women, but only, I can say, in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, women were allowed to take any positions in the army. Before 2022, there were limitations of what positions or careers women could take in army. It's like a positive thing that happened, but it's such a shame that it happened so late. And about the equal rights and equal thinking of how women are perceived, yes, of course, the traditional viewing of women's role is very strong in Ukraine. And for example, the recent research showed that the pay gap between women and men is about 27% in Ukraine, occupying the same position, doing the same job, and still women receive 27% less. When it comes to the women in power or women in politics, the quota was introduced for the MPs, and it was about 32% of MPs should be women. Now it's only 21%. So even there, with quotas, it's still not fulfilled. Yeah, as you mentioned, for the defense forces, a lot of women volunteered or joined armies, and they both serve as in medical careers, but also actually fighting.
And we also know that women and children are the ones that are most affected when it comes to wartime. So how is that been visible in the Ukraine during these years?
Do you mean war crimes, the conflict-related sexual violence? It's been in the both international community and Ukrainian government reacted very quickly when in April 2022 we got pictures of Bucha and European occupation and what happened there. And so both international community, Ukrainian government, they provided the services for the survivors, conflict-related sexual violence. But at the same time, it created a big pressure both on the survivors and those who are around them and the organizations, civil society organizations who work with this issue, because a lot of money were sent for this kind of work. It means a lot of organizations, obviously, who haven't worked with that before, took the initiative. It means maybe the quality of services was not that high. But also it created a tension and pressure to find actually those survivors. And people, there is a big stigma about this kind of crimes. So people tend not to go and tell about this things that happen to them. And about the confidentiality on all stages, it wasn't, communicated very well. And I would say, for example, recently we did an exchange with the organizations from Bosnia and Herzegovina, where war ended 30 years ago. And what they say is that now they have women who came to them, and all those years they didn't want to talk about this.
Yeah.
But now they want to bring perpetrators for the response. So it could be the same situation in Ukraine. And for example, as our partner organization described at that time, summer 2022, it was like a safari to find the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Unfortunately, that took place. The consequences of that kind of crimes we would see later after the victory of Ukraine.
And you talked about the women who are displaced within the country, but what about the women like yourself who have actually made the hard and difficult decision to actually leave the country? What's the situation like for you?
I left the country because I wanted, but for many women who ran the war, it wasn't the wish. It was a matter of survival. And some of them, when they crossed the border, they didn't even know where they go. They just loaded on the buses, and the buses drove many, many hours, and then the doors opened, and they're in Luxembourg. So for many women, it was like that. And many came back. A lot of women came back because it's really hard to be alone in a country that you don't know anyone, you don't know the language, you don't know how the society works. And in the beginning, of course, every European country supported Ukrainian refugees in some or the other way, providing the housing, providing support, financial support, and different kind of social services that were available for Ukrainian refugees. But also it's been almost 2 years, and every country has their own rules. So what is available for Ukrainian refugees in Sweden is not, for example, matter in Spain or Germany. I know that lots of women came back to Ukraine, especially in summer 2022, because kids, they either start online school and living in European countries, or they get back and continue studying there. But at the same time, there are a lot of women who could find a job and got integrated and stayed in Europe. That's also a lot of cases like that. But as now everyone points out, the longer the war, the less people will get back. They got integrated, they got jobs, kids start schools. So that's a reality.
And that's a tragedy as well, of course, because you're draining the country of a lot of people that could actually help build a society. So
yes, and usually those who find work and could integrate it in the society, they had some jobs in Ukraine before, right? So we're losing the best.
And as you mentioned, there's a strong civil society development within the Ukraine, and a lot of organizations working to better the country. And Kvinna to Kvinna is one of the organizations that are there supporting different projects connected to women. So what are Kvinna to Kvinna doing in the Ukraine?
We support women's civil society organizations. So those organizations that are led by women. That is our focus. And currently we support organizations in different geographic regions. So we have partner organizations working in Kiev. We have those who work on the east part of Ukraine, where the front line now. We have the south and west part of the country. And we also try to focus different aspects of women's challenges that women have now in Ukraine. And we have organizations, for example, that support people with disabilities and women with disabilities and their rights. We have a feminist lesbian organization that works with LGBT QI community in Kharkiv, that is 40 kilometers from border with Russia. But at the same time, this is a city that has 1.5 million population, even now during the war. We have also LGBTQI organization on the south in Kherson that was occupied for 4 months by Russian, but now it's shelled every day, several times a day, even if it's part of Ukraine. We have also organizations who work on the West with gender-based violence and, of course, IDPs and their integration into the society and empowering economical women so they have possibilities to support themselves and support the family.
And Kvinna has been there for a long time, but has there been any change in focus after the full-scale invasion?
Kvinna started their work in Ukraine 2015, right exactly after the occupation of Crimea and the war in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And I would say, yes, the focus has been changed because when the full-scale invasion started, the women's civil society organizations started doing a lot of humanitarian support, which they haven't been doing before, opening a lot of shelters. For example, before the war, they had 1 shelter. After the invasion, they ended up with 6 shelters. So the focus changed because before we could talk about the resolution 1325, working more strategically on the advocacy level. Meanwhile, after the war started, the focus changed to survival, to the basic needs. Now, 1.5 years later, we could say that organizations starting thinking strategically, looking long-term perspective, but still it's very hard when you have ongoing war in the country. So I would say, yes, the focus lies more on survival needs, I would say.
And the work that Lotta Kåren is doing right now to raise funds for the organization Women's Perspective, what can you tell about their work?
Well, Women's Perspective is one of the oldest women-led organization in Ukraine. They were founded in 1998 in Lviv. And since then, their focus lied with gender-based violence. They supported the survivors of gender-based violence, both by providing shelter and supporting the survivors in the court by providing legal support. And they also do a strong advocacy on implementing the Istanbul Convention. And the Istanbul Convention was ratified by Ukraine June 2022. And now it's a big task for Ukraine to actually start implementing Istanbul Convention. And once implemented, it will provide support for survivors of gender-based violence.
It's amazing to be able to quickly, change focus and do something like that. And I guess just because the organizations were there before, they had a network, they had the possibilities to do that switch.
Yes, that plays crucial role because a local civil society organization, they know the community, they know, I could say, play rules, because it depends on in what region you are. They know how to approach maybe local government, with whom to cooperate, who is more responsive to this kind of issues, because gender-based violence, especially domestic violence, is a strong taboo in Ukrainian society. A lot of women could be said it's your internal problem, deal with it on your own. Or now also the domestic violence rises, for example, because veterans got back home. They are not provided with support they need, actually, the programs, for example, psychological programs don't have anything on domestic violence. But also, obviously, Ukrainian society has a strong trust into military. And this is also plays dual role, because the veteran, who is at the same time could be perpetrator there is a thin line to walk.
Of course, there's always two sides to it, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's very clear that, of course, the population of Ukraine, but especially women, do need support and help. And what would you say are the most important things that other countries or us as individuals can do to help?
Well, I would say the first is not losing the focus. The war is still there, and now the winter is coming. And last winter, Russia tried to destroy all the infrastructure objects, especially the one that support heating and electricity in the big cities. So that's a big anticipation that they would try to do the same. Of course, Ukraine got a defensive weapon to get away those rockets and drones that they sent. But still, for people who are there, it's a lot of fear and a lot of sleepless nights, because obviously for psychological pressure, they are doing it at night, so people don't sleep. So like the focus on the war in Ukraine and trying to, I think now, both fundraising, because we hear from many actors that the funding next year will be decreased. And when I mean funding, I mean, for example, humanitarian support that the EU provides to Ukraine, and most like strategic support that is provided to Ukraine.
Very important point there. We cannot lose focus. It's still ongoing, and you, as I think you always say from the Ukrainian perspective, is that you're fighting the war for all of the West, really, when it comes to fighting for democracy and the perspective of being able to decide oneself what kind of rule we want to have in our countries. Yeah.
Yes, fighting for values that European Union declares. And this, like, I think it was a week ago that European Commission advised to open the negotiation about the accession process for Ukraine. So this is a big step in the relationship between Ukraine and European Union.
And as you mentioned, you're from the Ukraine yourself. You left way before 2022, but can you share a little bit about your decision making? What happened, and how did you decide to leave?
For me personally, the war started 2014. I was born and raised in the south part of Ukraine, which is called Crimea. And that part of Ukraine was annexed, first occupied, and then annexed by Russian Federation in March 2014. By that time, I didn't live there. I lived in Kiev already, but all my family, my friends, my partner's family lived in Crimea and still live in Crimea. So that's when my home was taken from me. Me and my partner wanted to try to live in European country. And then we had an opportunity to stay for some time in Sweden, and we decided to stay here.
How has these years been for you? And then with the full-scale invasion as well, and being so far away from your family and relatives?
Well, the most hard thing is when you understand you can't go there. You can't travel there. You don't have, like, your kids can't visit their grandmas and grandpas. It always comes, during some holidays period in Sweden, when people travel to visit their families, and you, even if you want to, you can't go there, like, physically. So this is a hard feeling, but also like understanding that you're in a safe space now, and you want to provide a better future for your kids. This is one thing, and also like working and supporting Ukraine and doing everything you can.
So what are your hopes for the future?
Hopes that Ukraine will get territory back as it was in 1991 after the Soviet collapse, And then one day I will fly to my hometown, because the last flight was there in 2014. Yeah, that's my hope, that one day I will get back there.
I'm sure that I and all our listeners hope with you that will become a reality in the not too distant future.
Yes.
Mariia, thank you so much for being with us and sharing what's going on in the Ukraine and giving us a perspective of what's happening. And we will surely together make sure that we don't lose sight of what's happening in the Ukraine.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the support that Lotta Karin provided to Women's Perspective, one of our partner organizations in Ukraine. It means a lot.
Mitt i allt det förskräckliga som ett krig ändå är så finns det massor av hopp och styrka i det som Mariia beskriver. Kvinnorna har inte på något sätt gett upp utan hittat sätt att fokusera på det som behövs. Och det blir så tydligt hur viktigt det är att ha ett starkt civilsamhälle som kan kliva in och stötta upp. Det har vi ju sett här i Sverige också vid stora kriser, inte minst pandemin. Samtalet med Mariia väcker också funderingar på vikten av att vi kvinnor organiserar oss nu i vardagen för att lyfta just de frågor som är viktiga för oss så här i uppbyggnaden av totalförsvaret. Svenska lottakåren samlar som sagt in medel till organisationen Women's Perspective i Ukraina, och om du vill bidra kan du göra det genom att köpa ögatnålen från någon av våra lottakårer. Tack för att du hjälper oss att hjälpa. Lästips relaterat till det vi samtalat om i det här avsnittet och även ögat-insamlingen, det hittar du på lottapodden.se. Och om du, precis som Svenska lottakåren, tycker att fred, demokrati och mänskliga rättigheter är värda att försvara och du vill vara med och göra skillnad för vårt samhälles beredskap och totalförsvar, ja, men då ska du gå till svenskalottakåren.se. Där hittar du information om hur just du kan göra skillnad. Nästa avsnitt av Lottapodden, det kan du lyssna på den 7 december. Och du prenumererar väl på Lottapodden? För då får du ju tillgång till nya avsnitt direkt när de släpps varannan vecka, före alla andra. Och om du inte prenumererar än, ja, men då rekommenderar jag dig att klicka på följa-knappen i din poddapp så du aldrig missar ett avsnitt. Och gillade du det här avsnittet? Då är jag säker på att andra i din närhet också skulle gilla det. Dela det vidare helt enkelt så de också kan lyssna. Och tack för att du lyssnar. Hej så länge!